What is up, Buttercups? Seether here, King Arthur Legends Rise. We are going to talk about the top five legendary heroes in the game. There is currently 13 or 14 in the pool. Four, yeah, 14, because I don't have Gaffrey. So there's 13, 14, including the one that you can get from a banner, an earlier beta version tested out banners. But for the most part, certainly any new player, you're looking at a pool of 13. We're going to focus on the top five best. So you do not need legendaries to complete the majority of the content in the game. Certainly, you do not need legendaries to complete the story in the game, nor do you need them for like the top two dungeons and for advancing. So Gorgos and Aldri. But they're nice, right? Especially if you pull one of the five we're going to talk about today. So let's jump into it. The first one we're going to start with is Merlin. Um, Merlin is just one of the best heroes in the game, flat out. He's classified as a support role, and yes, he does that just well, just fine. In every single battle, he can apply. So no matter what content, he can apply a 10% damage reduction to your team. So just a usable everywhere sort of leadership ability. Um, and so like that's great right there. And then he prefers daytime, and that comes into play here with his passive. So getting into the passives, his first passive, as soon as you use S2, which is his number one skill, we'll get into that in a second, but you're going to use that all the time. Um, as long as his HP is 50% or higher, like at the beginning of the fight, he's not only gonna change it to his preferred weather pattern and get those associated buffs that they give you, but it's also just gonna go ahead and okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and refresh vigor, just full charge of vigor, just the first time you use the skill. Um, if you get it maxed out, you can even do it twice in the battle if it lasts more than 8 rounds. So that's cool. Second passive here, upon using skill 3, just a defense increase and recover over time. That's not all that interesting. I mean, it's nice, but that's not what makes Merlin great. Um, and then the third passive, again, when using skill 3, let's just throw in a team res, just for giggles, right? So on top of all his other awesomeness, if Merlin himself is 30% health or lower, you have a 30% chance to revive your entire team. Oh yeah, and go ahead and put recovery over time on them, which is just, a heal over time spell, in addition to, defensive increase, and all that other stuff too. So not like you're gonna bank on this skill, but it is pretty entertaining when you think all hope is lost, and then boom, he reses your three dead teammates, and you all of a sudden have, at least a small chance to win the fight after all. So if all that wasn't enough, we haven't even gotten to his skills yet. So his default is ice. So if you pull him, this is what you're gonna get. His ice relic. He's got freeze. So he's got a triple hit freeze and as part of his S1, up to 60% chance when it's maxed out. So like pig or any enemies using barriers, you got the multi hit here built in. But here is his bread and butter, the S2, his frosty explosion, but which applies frozen remains. So first of all, it's a 4 hit attack, with 100% chance to apply frozen remains. Now, if you don't fully understand the difference between chance to apply versus chance to land, make sure you check out my other video, that explains that. So at max level, he does all that for a total of, with the extra turn here at level 5, 3 turns. So what is Frozen Remains? Frozen Remains is insane. So it triggers one hit. So think about it as a proc that you're placing on an enemy that whenever you hit it, it goes off for your benefit. Okay. So when hit, so i.e., when you attack an enemy that has frozen remains on them, you have a 100% chance to apply damage taken decrease 2 and dot immunity, okay, for 2 turns. So that alone right there is pretty stellar. So you get basically like a defensive buff with damage reduction, and you get dot immunity. You also get a 50% chance, 50-50, to trigger an attack gauge recharge, which is your turn meter, for 90%. So practically a full bar turn meter at a 50% chance to trigger. Okay. So if you don't have them, take my word for it. It is game changing. Okay. So huge, huge buff, uh, support tactic, whatever you want to call it, that he can apply and just make like life a hell of a lot easier. On top of all that, on top of the amazing passives and that S2 alone, his S3, his special, has a AoE freeze, a 70% chance double attack, 70% chance to freeze the entire enemy party at max level. 70% chance. Again, even if you pass the 70% chance to apply, you still have to pass the resistance check on the enemy. Again, check out my previous video if you don't know the difference between that. But any hero like Merlin that applies debuffs, dots, any sort of status effect period, you're gonna want effect accuracy in his stats to make sure that those things stick. Anyway, so that's Merlin. He's amazing. If you pull him, it's a good day. It's a good day in Gotcha Gaming land. All right, number two, Morgan. Morgan, her relic is fire. Her default relic is fire. That's what you'll get if you pull her. Passive's not quite as stellar as Merlin, but still pretty damn amazing. You've got her first one. So if she's at 50% health or lower, she's gonna throw on some fat buffs, like just to kind of make her all that much harder to kill, and more potent. You know, during the end of her life. So she's going to change the weather to night, which is her preferred thing in terms of weather with those associated buffs. She's going to apply an effect accuracy increase 3 and attack speed increase 3 as long as the weather stays night. Effect accuracy 3 is 80%, you guys. 80% effect accuracy. Attack speed 3 is 60. So 80% effect accuracy, 60% attack speed. Like that's pretty big, right? So when we get into her skills, it's going to become more clear why the effect accuracy could be like what saves your match or saves your round. Okay, passive number two, the skill two, right? It's 100% chance to trigger an attack gauge reduction, right? And a buff removal. Okay, so no matter what, it's going to the chance is going to pass. So you're going to have an effect accuracy versus effect resistance check to see if the gauge reduction and the buff removal actually happens. But that's like wow, right? Rewind the enemy turn meter or attack gauge, and possibly remove 2 buffs. The third passive has to deal with skill 1. We'll get into in a second, but again, 100% chance, so guaranteed the roll check goes right to the effect accuracy versus effect resistance, but you can apply defense decrease 2 and damage taken increase 3. So like kind of like a double whammy defensive debuff to the enemy. That's just going to make them take a whole lot more damage. And maxed out, you can apply that every third turn. Not that you're going to be using her S1 a lot, but if you're short on vigor, it's probably one of the best S1 skills in the entire game, right? Probably one of the best basic attacks, which is here. It's a double attack with at max a 70% chance to apply sleep for 2 turns. So if you apply sleep, they can't do anything, right? Unless you attack them, the enemy. So you can just kind of put them on the back burner for 2 whole turns if that lands. But her S2, like Merlin, is where her bread and butter is. She has a triple attack and a triple chance to apply a 20% attack gauge decrease to all enemies. So AoE attack, all enemies will roll 3 times for a chance to do a 20% attack gauge decrease each time. Okay, so if all 3 land, if you get lucky with RNG and all 3 70% chances roll, and all three pass your effect accuracy versus resistance check, you're going to do a 60% attack gauge reduction at max level, which is huge. Her S3 isn't used a ton. It is a double hit. It's a double hit. It's a 100% chance to again kind of apply that damage taken increase, just to make the enemy take more damage. And then you got a 100% chance to apply that recovery disruption, which if you're familiar with Aldry, that's more of like an Akalon or Argus. Like that's their job, right? So you're not going to use it a ton, but it's there if you need some sort of like in the pinch, like heal prevention for the enemy. It is interesting though. You can stack. You can stack the damage taken increase debuff from the S1 with the S3. So you can get two of them on there. Again, you're probably not going to use it much in real life practice, but if you're just messing around and you want to throw throw a couple of those debuffs in there and then smack them really hard with like Betty's S2 or something just to see like your maximum total damage, the numbers get pretty crazy. So again, her fire is default. We're going to focus on that, but ice, real quick, if you happen to pull that, the S2, wow, like it doesn't do the turn meter reduction, attack gauge reduction that fire does, but you have even more chance of buff removal, and a really good chance to apply again that damage taken decrease. So that same kind of mechanic that is probably less often used with her passive in regards to S1 and her S3 with fire really comes to life, and you can use it all the time with her S2. And again, you drop a couple of these bad boys on somebody, and like your DPSs are gonna go ham on the bad guys that have that on them. Cool. So third, we've got Guinevere. So Gwen's primary job is to do two things. Her passive, it's one of the best passives in the game. It does essentially it prevents your team from getting abnormal statuses. So it talks about romantic reversal, which at max will last for 50 turns. Abnormal status immunity, which means the target cannot be hit by abnormal statuses. So, oblivion, sleep, freeze, like anything that bad that that isn't damage related, that either confuses or prevents your team from taking a turn, stops that from happening. 50 turns, right? 50 turns. Um, Now, when she is hit, there is a chance, there's a 30% chance to be specific when she's hit. It can decrease that by 10 at a time. So even if you get really unlucky, I mean really unlucky, at max skill, your team's good for like 5 rounds to keep that whole team buff up. It's huge. I mean, having abnormal status protection for your entire team, besides her, I forgot to mention that, but it is everybody besides her, excluding self. So, but yeah, it's huge. Um, S2 just talks about what she can do with what happens when she gets past 50% health. She applies a shield to allies and applies invincibility to herself. It's just a staying power mechanic. It's not going to be, game changing, but it does extend the life of your team a little bit if you get in trouble. Um, and then, if you're hit and you do have a shield, you can put like a very small like defensive increase on your team. But you're honestly just being that these are level one attack increase and defense increase one, you're not going to notice it a ton. But yeah, like I said, her passive is why she's amazing, as well as her S1. So for Hella Cheat Vigor, one Vigor, she can not only is a triple hit, again back to like Pig and Barrier and needing multi-hit attacks for certain things. At max level, she has a 70% chance to remove all buffs. Okay, so it's a made for pig mechanic. Penavide, the pig boss, just throwing one vigor out there. Barrier is a buff. A shield is not a buff in terms of the mechanic. A shield has to be either like lived through through like the rounds of how many rounds the shield is up, or you have to damage through it, like from a percentage of damage, which is what the Tiger boss has. But barriers are specific to an amount of like a hit counter. The pig throws up two versions. One is a 6, and the other is a 20. The 20 one is hella annoying if you don't have buff removal, which is why Gwen is just huge. Um, her shield, her S3, her ability to dole out shields is not that big a deal in terms of damage mitigation. There's heroes like Lapaldi and way better, well, basically Lapaldi, but like that's a way better way to damage to mitigate damage to have damage mitigation on your team. But both dragons, or the first two dragons, Dragon 1, Dragon 2, um, shield can be counter mechanics to their abilities. So she is just like born for bosses. Arena, PvP, like stellar, like super helpful in terms of what she can do for your team from either preventing abnormal statuses, removing buffs, or again applying shields to counter those dragon mechanics. All right, number 4 is Bedivere. Good old Betty. Betty's default is fire, which unfortunately, I mean, well, it's still great, but it does not beat the king. His frost relic is literally the best DPS in the game, bar none. Okay, and the main reason for that is his powerhouse move, his S2, which is single target attack. It applies a critical strike buff before the actual attack. So CS rate increase 2, which is 40%. So before he swings, before he makes his attack, he self buffs himself for that turn 40% crit rate. So if you have 60% crit rate built into his gear, that is essentially a guaranteed crit when using his Frost Relic in single target attack. On top of that, if that wasn't enough, on top of that, he gains critical strike additional damage upon critical strike, right? So that basically guaranteed crit that you're gonna hit with this buff, this like self buff, it's gonna throw additional damage on top of the truckload of damage it already does, being the skill that it is, on top of the fact that at max level, you can add 40% damage to it. So it is just an insane amount of DPS. With buffs and debuffs, like literally Betty can hit bosses for over 100,000 damage, 100k plus. I am not kidding you. So he's just really good. So yeah, so the one caveat with Betty, fire is great, but if you're new, if you're just starting off, I probably wouldn't spend a ton of resources into fire because although it's still amazing, like Arthur, for example, he can be your DPS. He can be your DPS in the beginning. I would probably recommend holding out until you get Frost before going mad and investing in Betty. Okay. Um, on that note, real quick, before when it is time to invest in Betty, I recommend in like maxing out this first passive before taking him to that third star. Because at the third star, you're going to open up the second passive, and then at 5 stars, you're going to open the third passive. If you max this out before going to the third star, this is the only passive that's open. So every talisman that you spend to upgrade that passive is automatically going to go into this one. It has nowhere else to go. Okay. But if you wait until he's 3 stars plus, then it's RNG. It's random. It's 50-50. And this is how all passes work. But it's 50-50 in terms of where this goes. And if you wait till he's 5 stars or higher, then you're dealing with all three. Um, this is why it's worth the wait. His first passive, upon attack, deals damage to two maxed out, two additional random enemies. He already does a crap ton of damage, but this attack also ignores a certain amount of defense. So, holy crap. So, not only are you just going to just rain a crap ton of damage on whatever target like you're hitting your S2 on, he's going to go ahead and turn around and just do a third round of damage essentially because again, this is the hit, well, the buff, the hit, the additional damage on your practically guaranteed crit strike, and then okay, I'm gonna go ahead and make two more rounds of additional damage, possibly to the same target. Okay, this random damage, random means random. It can be the same target that it was originally targeted. Okay, with the S2, so just a damage machine. Okay. You're only going to use S1 if he has no vigor. It's still just fine attack, but obviously you want the tunes around him, his team, right? His supporting cast of heroes. You hopefully have like one of your supports or one of your healers in vigor gear or something to where when it's Betty's turn, like he's got three vigor minimum. And of course, the vigor system is going to change like when the next patch comes out. But for right now, you want to make sure that this guy has three vigor whenever it's his turn. Even if that means like putting additional vigor stats on other heroes that might go before him. We call that like a vigor battery. So anyhow, that's that. So his ultimate, his S3, it's his AoE attack. It also fine, also amazing, does a ton of damage. Like all S3s though, for legendaries, very very expensive. Needs the full five vigor. But yeah, it does a truckload of damage too. But your bread and butter, what you're going to use all the time is this S3. Um, by the way, like his second and third passive, the one that you don't care much about, like passive two is still pretty cool. It does reduce the cooldown of his other all his passives really. So whenever you're talking about reducing the cooldown of like this bad boy that again just smacks other enemies on top of his original target is great. So S1 maxed out F S1 maxed out is a 3 turn cooldown. But then you can like reduce that again through this. And this itself, you can get down to a 2 turn cooldown. So at the end, like all said and done, you're doing this, I think, every like 2 or 3 turns. So really, really cool. No one cares about this. First of all, you're not going to use S3 very much. And a does ability switch, like all ability switch is if Betty has a debuff on him and he uses S3, it converts that debuff into a critical strike damage increase, which is cool. But again, you're probably not going to be using S3 a whole lot. That might change when the new patch drops. But anyway, all about the first passive. Max it out before you level him. Pass like within the first 2 stars. Don't go to the third star until you can max this bad boy out. And then yeah, enjoy the best damage dealer in the game. Finally, we've got Gillian, classified also as a support, but she is the best healer in the game. Best healer, period. She does not only does she do that role really well, she's got some like extra tricks up her sleeve that just make her even better. Her default is fire. That's fine. The one thing about healers is that they're like skills typically, well, I'll say this, their heals are not very dependent on their skills. So that typically most games you think like, oh, healer, like, okay, I want them to heal more, I want to max their skills because their skills probably have something to do with healing. Not really. Not so much here. We'll get into that in a second. So again, first passive, highly recommend maxing this out before carrying her all the way. Because as a bonus, even though she's already the best healer, or one, like, yeah, the best healer, um, she can do attack gauge decrease. So like Morgan, she can rewind the enemy turn meter or enemy attack gauge on not one, but two random enemies with a pretty high success rate. Okay, so that's awesome. Um, Now, so her second, so Harvest Energy, her second passive triggers overhealing. So whenever any ally, is hit with abnormal status, so freeze, confusion, like oblivion, all those bad things that can happen to your team, she's gonna instantly clear it. It just removes all active abnormal statuses. Remove them all. Okay. So that comes in handy all the time, but specifically the most common is against Aldri, the bear boss. At the end, when he tries to freeze, like I think it's up to maximum of 3 people on your team, maybe it's two. But anyway, he does that freeze that just infuriates you because he freezes your team, and then you can't put recovery disrupt on him. Then he heals all the way, and then you have to start all over. You want to chuck your device out the window. So this prevents that as long as she is not one of the ones that got frozen. Okay, if she's one of the ones that got frozen, then you're screwed. But at least she will dramatically reduce like the kind of RNG chance of like again your round just tanking and having to start all over because he gets that heal off. The next one is again like upon ally recovery. So anytime an ally heals, and we'll get into that in a second, but you're going to be using her S2, which heals. Um, so anytime an ally recovers, there's a 70% chance at max, 70% chance to again trigger that attack gauge recharge. So she's got another mechanic built in that can just reduce that enemy turn meter. So awesome. Um, and then we get into S2, our most commonly used thing. It's going to deal attack-based damage with a 65% chance. Again, attack gauge decrease by 50% with a 65% chance to do it. Oh yeah, and then on top of that, it heals. It applies recovery like based upon their max HP um, to the single ally to the ally with the lowest current health. Okay. So, what all this jargon means is that the amount healed is based off of the max HP of the character being healed, of the healer, of the hero being healed. Okay. The hero that gets healed, the single ally that is chosen, is the one with the currently the lowest HP. So, yeah, like in addition to her healing, she has massive supportability when it comes to turn meter manipulation. And then again, that overhealing is huge to get you out of a pinch. Um, Other relics are super useful. We're already running long on the video, so I won't get into those two, but they're all useful. But her default of fire is also really good. So the only one of the top five that you really kind of have to hope to pull that additional relic is Betty. Otherwise, you're good to go if you pull any of those 5 people. So happy pulling, happy gotcha. Hope you found this video helpful. If you did, throw it a like. It helps me know to that I'm not wasting my time. So hopefully you find it helpful, guys. Catch you later.